Alright, here's my passion project. History of aviation. Anyway, the first form of flight was the hot air balloon, which was invented by the Montgolfier brothers in 1783. The way it works is having a flames-burning gas be captured. Because the gas is lighter than air, the balloon flies. Then, let's move over to the Wright brothers. Wow, more bros. While they were young, they got a helicopter toy from their dad, and loved it. Like, a lot. Because of that, in 1903, they invented the world's first airplane. Then, 3 years before, Ferdinand von Zeppelin in Germany invented the Airship, like the Goodyear ones. They were really good for traveling and more because the gas it used separated in chambers, so if one chamber got shot, they could still fly because of the other chambers. In fact, it was going to be the future of travel. But then, in 1937, the Hindenburg disaster happened, which kind of shut down that dream. Then, back in time again, a guy named Raymond Orteig, I think that's how you pronounce it, made a cash prize, which was basically this. Hey bro, I'll give you $25,000 if you can fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. Yeah, people didn't really make it. Finally, in 1927, 17 years later, a guy named Charles Lindbergh got a plane specially made for him called the Spirit of St. Louis. This plane finally had the cash prize be taken, and Lindbergh made the first solo transatlantic flight after landing in Paris. Fast forward 2 years after the Hindenburg, and now it's World War II! Planes got a whole lot faster, and yeah, that's really it. But what happened after World War II is much more interesting. You see, the U.S. government needed faster planes to get around their good friend, the USSR. I joke, the U.S. did not like Soviet Russia. I don't know why they needed fast planes, though. So they tried having planes break the sound barrier. If you don't know, the sound barrier isn't really a barrier, but rather a really fast speed. So they got a guy named Chuck Yeager, who was a really good fighter pilot during World War II. So on October 4th, 1947, Chuck went into the air, increased the speed, and then a big boom happened. But Chuck was still alive! Wait, what? You see, when Chuck broke the sound barrier, that boom is called a sonic boom, which is a booming sound that happens when an aircraft goes faster than the speed of sound, which Chuck did. But how fast did Chuck go, you weren't asking? Well, he went Mach 1, which seems slow since it's only 1. But in other words, he went 760 miles per hour. Then, about 10 years later, since the Nazis, who were the baddies of World War II, had given America and the USSR really cool rockets that they were making before they dissolved into nothing, they had both tried using them to get something into space. While the US didn't really succeed, per se, on October 4th, 1957, the USSR had sent the first man-made satellite into orbit, nicknamed Sputnik. The US was worried since now the Soviets could nuke them from space. Then, 1 month later, the USSR sent a dog named Laika into space. Unfortunately, the dog died a few hours after launch. Oof. Anyway, on January 31st, 1958, the US finally got themselves together by launching Explorer 1. Finally. But you fool! You thought that the Soviets had stopped? No! So on April 12, 1961, a cosmonaut, the Soviets astronauts, got sent into orbit! Ha ha ha! I don't know how a country poops their pants, but the US did. Somehow. Anyway, on May 5th, same year, the US sent the first American into orbit. Then, the president at the time, John F. Kennedy, said this. Hey guys, we need to get our A-game on, so why don't we send a guy to the moon? Alright? And then he comes back safely, and by the end of the decade. So that was like big, because 10 years? Are you crazy? So for this crazy mission, NASA, who are the people who took people into space for America, designed a crazy, powerful rocket called the Saturn V, which was 33 stories tall and delivers more thrust than this banana. So the first mission it used was Apollo 1, which, unfortunately, a fire killed all the crew members in the control module of the ship. Then, I'm going to fast forward a lot. A what? Then, I'm going to fast forward a lot. On July 16th, 1969, the Saturn V went into orbit. Now, I probably should have said this earlier, but this is how Saturn V worked. So first of all, how does a normal rocket work anyway? Well, let's use little Timmy's model rocket here. You see, for a rocket to get into the air, it has to get thrust, which is something that pushes another thing. The way it creates thrust is either with a gunpowder mixture, which is what Timmy's engine uses, or for big rockets, a mixture of liquid oxygen and gasoline. Using Newton's third law of motion, which is for every action there is an equal and or opposite action. Basically, if a flame in a rocket motor is pushing south, then the rocket will go north. The rocket flies! Okay, so now let's take the Saturn V. Now, the Saturn V worked differently because it was a 3-stage rocket, and it contained people. So, the way the Saturn V worked was that once the engine, or stage, ran out, the Saturn V dropped that stage and started burning the next stage. The stages are mainly why the Saturn V is massive. Then, once the Saturn V gets into orbit, everybody checks if everything is good. Then the Saturn V uses that third stage to get out of Earth's gravitational pull and to go on course to the moon, which will approximately take 3 days to reach. Meanwhile, the people on the ship, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, wonder how I made a perfect transition into the Apollo 11 mission and try to connect the lunar module, the thing that puts them on the moon, to the command module, the thing that takes them through space. They do it and get pulled into the moon's orbit. Now, while Buzz and Neil are getting into the lunar module, or the Eagle, Michael stays on the command module just to make sure everything's good and stuff. Now, the Eagle goes ahead and separates from the command module and touches down on a crater that's the width of a football field. They let Houston, the control center, know and get ready to step on the moon. Then, Neil Armstrong goes on the moon and says a really cool one-liner. "One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Finally, Buzz comes along. They both plant the US flag, go back to the command module, use the moon's gravitational pull to slingshot them back to the Earth, splash down, and get a parade. Also, they single-handedly destroyed the USSR. Then, everything basically slowed down from there because going to the moon was the best thing that humans have ever done. Once NASA was done with going into the moon, in 1971, they started the Space Shuttle program, which lasted until 2012. Also, in 1998, the International Space Station was launched, which is still in orbit today. So what's going on now, and in the future? Well, NASA is developing the Orion spacecraft, which is way better than the Saturn V. Also, NASA is planning to go back to the moon. They're also working with SpaceX to go to Mars. So, that's what's happening with aviation. I hope you like this, because it took a ton of time. So, bye!